My questions start with Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, if you listen to the media, you would think that all First Nations are against all resource development. Can you tell me the truth about where communities that you represent stand on these projects?
Well, a lot of the communities that do support LNG, for example, did so under their own community processes, under democratically elected leadership. And what you're seeing in BC right now is a push to actually silence or marginalize democratically elected First Nations people. And it's the politics and ideology. It's a big problem in BC. And in fact, everything you talk about in terms of the media, nobody's actually going to all those First Nations that signed on to Kitter Morgan or onto the LNG project. There's two major LNG projects in Kitimat, and both have the support of First Nations. Nobody wants to do a story on that because it's just not sexy enough. It doesn't make headlines.
Right.
And yet already you see the benefit going to all these communities along the way to address poverty, substance abuse, children in care. But it just doesn't make the news because it's just not sexy.
Right. And all of the journalists and so-called environmental activists who stand in the way of the projects that would lift your people out of poverty, once they succeed at blocking the projects, do they stay around to help your people?
No. And in fact, if they don't get the support of the leadership of a community, they'll find somebody else within that community to actually support their opposition. It's something I've talked about in terms of the BC legislature as a number one principle that I see in terms of legislatures. Do not use First Nations for your politics. For one of the most disadvantaged people in Canada, especially for the last 15 years, where we've actually seen light at the end of the tunnel, where we can actually engage in economy and actually say no to government funding.
Will UNDRIP help your people?
No, UNDRIP will not help, especially in the form of Bill 41 that was passed in the BC legislature. It's all rhetoric, it's narrative, and it doesn't actually speak to Section 35 of the Constitution. It doesn't speak to any of the pursuant case law that defines Section 35 of the Constitution. There's no definition, and in fact, they've inserted it into the BC Environmental Assessment Act in BC. And all that vagueness is going to actually create more and more uncertainty. And unfortunately, we're going to have to go to court to find that definition of UNDRIP.
And, First Nations have a constitutional right to be consulted about projects that touch upon their territories, and rightly so. When Justin Trudeau vetoed the Northern Gateway pipeline, for which First Nations communities had $2 billion worth of benefit sharing agreements, did he consult with the people who were supporting the project in First Nations communities?
I don't recall, because my engagement was actually in opposition to Enbridge under the Conservative government. And one of my biggest issues back then was, nobody truly understood the Haida court case on a duty to consult and accommodate, much less the corporations. In fact, the LNG companies that came in after Enbridge said that they will not make the same mistakes as Enbridge. I had apologies from the presidents of Enbridge after all was said and done for their treatment of Aboriginal rights and title. And I went through all the processes, I went through all the court cases, I went through all of it. And fundamentally, at the core of the issue was an understanding of Aboriginal rights and title. Today, it's much different. It's much better. Everybody understands Aboriginal rights and title is here to stay.
Excellent. And I understand all the elected communities on the right of way of the Coastal Gas Link are supporting that natural gas project. Is that your understanding as well?
Oh, without a doubt, they all signed on, including First Nations along the tanker route.
Right.
They signed on, and they did it for the benefit that actually we're all enjoying right now as we speak for the last 5 years.
And then, so the non-Indigenous protesters who were blocking trains and standing in the way and creating these blockades, would you say they represent the First Nations communities affected by the Coastal GasLink pipeline and liquefaction project?
No, not even close. In fact, they actually blockaded the BC legislature, and I was told that I should actually support Aboriginal rights and title by a protester. And I had spent the better part of 15 years doing exactly that to get my people to a better place, along with 17 other First Nations along the pipeline. They were all doing it under the banner of rights and title. And
Right.
a lot of the protesters across Canada don't have a good understanding of what rights and title actually is.
So this is a project that will benefit the communities that elected leaders that unanimously support it, and the communities they represent. It will actually reduce global greenhouse gases by replacing foreign oil with clean, green Canadian natural gas. It helps the environment. It helps First Nations escape poverty and achieve independence. Isn't that what we're continually told that we should be doing?
That's what I learned back in 2004.
Right.
I've been reviewing LNG projects, forestry projects, solar and wind, you name it, I've reviewed it. And I always thought that was the common denominator, protect the environment, but actually try to do something for the planet, as well as try uplift Aboriginals. And by the way, when you uplift Aboriginals in any setting, you actually make the community stronger,
Agreed.
BC stronger, Canada stronger. I don't understand why we're actually allowing the opposition to actually dictate what's happening here in BC and Canada.
The gatekeepers.
Thank you very
Yes.
much, Mr. Poilievre.